The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Admiral Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her black sedan. Her crisp, white uniform bore the weight of 30 years of service, each ribbon and medal telling a story of battles fought both on the seas and in the corridors of military hierarchy. At 52, she had climbed higher than any woman before her in the Navy's command structure, breaking barriers with the same precision she once used to navigate through enemy waters. The base buzzed with activity as sailors hurried to their morning duties. Admiral Mitchell had seen thousands of young faces come and go throughout her career, each one eager to prove themselves in service to their country. Today felt different somehow, though she couldn't quite place why. Perhaps it was the weight of the ceremony ahead, or maybe it was the strange dream that had haunted her sleep the night before. As she walked toward the administrative building, her aide, Lieutenant Commander James Rodriguez, fell into step beside her. Rodriguez had been with her for 3 years, a competent officer who understood the delicate balance required when working with someone of the admiral's stature. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned his position through merit rather than politics. "Admiral, the ceremony begins in 2 hours," Rodriguez informed her, consulting his tablet. "The press will be arriving shortly, and Admiral Thompson from the Pacific Fleet wants to speak with you before the proceedings begin." Mitchell nodded, her mind already shifting into the focused state she had perfected over decades of military service. Today's ceremony was meant to honor the Navy's recent achievements in anti-piracy operations off the Horn of Africa. It should have been a straightforward affair, a celebration of successful missions and the brave men and women who had carried them out. The Admiral's reputation preceded her wherever she went. Known for her sharp tactical mind and unwavering dedication to her sailors' welfare, she had earned respect across all branches of the military. Her colleagues often spoke of her ability to make difficult decisions under pressure, a skill that had saved countless lives during her various commands. Yet today, something felt off about the entire situation. Inside the administrative building, the atmosphere was charged with pre-ceremony tension. Staff officers moved with purposeful efficiency, ensuring every detail was perfect. Admiral Mitchell had overseen dozens of such events, but she never took their importance for granted. These ceremonies served multiple purposes beyond mere recognition. They reinforced the values and traditions that held the military together, reminded everyone of their shared mission, and provided an opportunity for leaders to connect with their personnel. As she reviewed the ceremony program in her office, Admiral Mitchell reflected on the recent anti-piracy operations that had brought them all together today. The missions had been challenging, requiring precise coordination between multiple naval vessels and international partners. Her tactical decisions had resulted in the successful rescue of several merchant vessels and the capture of numerous pirates who had been terrorizing shipping lanes for months. The knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, and Admiral Thompson stepped inside. Robert Thompson was a seasoned officer whose reputation for straight talk had earned him both friends and enemies throughout his career. His presence always commanded attention, and today his expression carried an unusual gravity. "Sarah, we need to discuss something before the ceremony," Thompson said, closing the door behind him. His tone carried the weight of serious concern, immediately putting Admiral Mitchell on alert. "What's the situation, Bob?" she asked, setting aside her papers and giving him her full attention. Thompson moved to the window overlooking the harbor, where several destroyers sat anchored in the morning light. "There's been some chatter about the anti-piracy operations. Nothing official yet, but some of the younger officers are asking questions about the engagement rules and casualty reports." Admiral Mitchell felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she had experienced countless times when facing difficult decisions at sea. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that require careful answers," Thompson replied, turning back to face her. "You know how these things go? Success breeds scrutiny, especially when the operations were as effective as yours were." The Admiral understood immediately. In the modern military, every action was subject to review, analysis, and second-guessing. The successful anti-piracy operations had indeed been effective, perhaps more so than some expected. When pirates threatened innocent lives, decisive action was necessary, but Such action always came with consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The mission parameters were clear, Admiral Mitchell said firmly. We followed established protocols and saved lives. The pirates made their choices when they decided to attack civilian vessels. I know that, and you know that, Thompson agreed. But you also know how the media can twist things, especially when they don't understand the complexities of maritime law and self-defense. Admiral Mitchell had dealt with media scrutiny before, but the current environment made everything more challenging. Social media amplified every story, often without context or understanding of the military's legal and ethical frameworks. A successful operation could quickly become controversial if presented incorrectly to the public. The conversation was interrupted by another knock. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez entered with a concerned expression. Admiral, there's a situation developing. A group of junior officers has requested a meeting with you before the ceremony. They seem quite insistent. Admiral Mitchell and Admiral Thompson exchanged glances. Unusual requests from junior officers rarely indicated good news, especially when they came immediately before important ceremonies. Did they indicate what this is about? Admiral Mitchell asked. No, ma'am, but they mentioned it was regarding the recent operations and wanted to discuss matters of professional concern. The phrase professional concern carried significant weight in military culture. It suggested that the officers believed they had witnessed something that required reporting through proper channels. Admiral Mitchell had built her career on maintaining the highest standards of conduct, and she had always encouraged her subordinates to raise legitimate concerns when they arose. How many officers are we talking about? Thompson asked. 6, sir. All from the destroyer squadron that participated in the anti-piracy operations. Admiral Mitchell considered her options carefully. She could postpone the meeting until after the ceremony, but doing so might suggest she was trying to avoid difficult conversations. Alternatively, she could meet with them now and risk derailing the ceremony if their concerns were serious enough to warrant immediate attention. Schedule the meeting for 15 minutes, she decided. In conference room B. And, James, I want you present as well. After Rodriguez left to make the arrangements, Thompson placed a supportive hand on the Admiral's shoulder. Whatever this is about, we'll handle it properly. Your record speaks for itself. Admiral Mitchell appreciated the support, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the morning's events were setting the stage for something much larger than a simple ceremony. In her experience, when junior officers requested urgent meetings just before public events, it usually meant someone had discovered information they believed their superiors needed to know immediately. The walk to conference room B felt longer than usual. Admiral Mitchell had faced enemy fire, navigated through diplomatic minefields, and made life-or-death decisions in the heat of battle. Yet the prospect of facing her own officers with unknown concerns created a different kind of tension entirely. Conference room B was a sterile space with a large table surrounded by standard military-issue chairs. The 6 officers were already seated when Admiral Mitchell entered, followed by Thompson and Rodriguez. She immediately recognized all of them, competent sailors who had served with distinction during the recent operations. Lieutenant Sarah Chun spoke first, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of nervousness. Admiral, we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. We wanted to discuss some observations from the recent anti-piracy operations. I'm listening, Admiral Mitchell replied, taking her seat at the head of the table. Lieutenant Commander Michael Davis, the senior officer among the group, leaned forward slightly. Ma'am, during the operation on September 15th, we observed the engagement with the pirate vessels near the Somali coast. We have some concerns about the rules of engagement and how they were applied. Admiral Mitchell felt her pulse quicken, but her expression remained neutral. Can you be more specific about your concerns? The room fell silent for a moment before Lieutenant Chun continued. Admiral, we understand that split-second decisions are necessary in combat situations. However, some of us observed actions that seemed to go beyond what was necessary for neutralizing the immediate threat. The weight of the allegations settled over the room like a heavy fog. Admiral Mitchell had faced many challenges throughout her career, but accusations from her own officers represented a particularly difficult situation. She knew that her response in the next few minutes could determine not only her own future, but also the Navy's reputation and the morale of everyone involved in the successful operations. "I want to be very clear about something," Admiral Mitchell began, her voice carrying the authority that had earned her respect throughout the fleet. "Every decision made during those operations was based on the immediate tactical situation and the need to protect innocent lives. We faced armed pirates who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill civilian crew members." Lieutenant Commander Davis nodded respectfully, but pressed forward. "We understand that, Admiral. But some of the engagement continued after the immediate threat had been neutralized. We're concerned about the interpretation of continuing threat in the after-action reports." The conversation that followed would later be remembered as a turning point, not just for Admiral Mitchell's career, but for how the Navy approached the complex moral and legal questions surrounding modern maritime operations. The junior officers had raised legitimate concerns that deserved serious consideration, even as they threatened to overshadow what should have been a day of celebration. As the meeting continued, it became clear that the officers had observed something during the anti-piracy operations that troubled them deeply. Their concerns weren't born from malice or insubordination, but from a genuine belief that their duty required them to report what they had witnessed. Admiral Mitchell found herself caught between defending her tactical decisions and acknowledging the validity of their professional concerns. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in less than an hour, but it was becoming increasingly clear that the day would unfold very differently than anyone had anticipated. The tension in conference room B had become almost unbearable when Admiral Thompson cleared his throat and addressed the assembled officers. "I think we need to take a step back here. You've made serious allegations that require proper investigation. Admiral Mitchell deserves the opportunity to respond fully to your concerns." Lieutenant Commander Davis straightened in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the position he and his colleagues found themselves in. "Admiral Thompson, we want to emphasize that we have the utmost respect for Admiral Mitchell. Our concerns aren't about her character or dedication to the Navy. They're about specific actions during the engagement that we believe warrant review." Admiral Mitchell appreciated the officer's attempt to maintain professional respect even while raising difficult questions. Throughout her career, she had emphasized the importance of subordinates feeling free to raise legitimate concerns without fear of retaliation. Now her own principles were being put to the test in a way she had never expected. "Tell me exactly what you observed," she said, her voice steady and professional. "I want to understand your perspective completely." Lieutenant Chun consulted her notes before speaking. "During the engagement with the third pirate vessel, after the initial boarding party had surrendered, we observed continued weapons fire from our position. The vessel had already raised a white flag, and the armed resistance had ceased. The allegation hung in the air like smoke from a fired cannon." Admiral Mitchell remembered the engagement clearly. It had been a complex situation with multiple moving parts and constantly evolving threat assessments. The pirates had indeed raised what appeared to be a surrender signal, but intelligence reports had warned of pirates using false surrenders to lure rescue vessels into ambush situations. "Lieutenant Chun, I need you to understand something about that particular engagement," Admiral Mitchell began. "We had received intelligence just hours before that pirates in that area had been using surrender signals as a tactic to draw in rescue vessels. 3 merchant ships had been attacked using exactly that method in the previous month." Lieutenant Commander Davis nodded, but maintained his position. "We understand the tactical considerations, Admiral. Our concern is that the engagement continued for several minutes after the surrender signal was raised. We counted at least 30 additional rounds fired at the vessel." Admiral Mitchell felt the weight of command settling heavily on her shoulders. Every military leader faced moments when their decisions would be scrutinized, when the fog of war cleared and actions that seemed necessary in the heat of battle appeared different in the cold light of review. She had always known this day might come, but she had hoped her record of service would speak for itself. The decision to continue engagement was based on confirmed movement of armed personnel on the vessel's deck, she explained. "Our thermal imaging showed individuals moving toward what appeared to be mounted weapons positions. The threat assessment team confirmed that the vessel still posed a significant danger to both our forces and the civilian ship they had been attacking. Admiral Thompson leaned forward, his experience evident in the careful way he framed his next question. What was the final casualty count on that vessel? The question everyone had been avoiding finally hung in the open. Admiral Mitchell had reviewed the casualty reports multiple times, and each reading had brought the same mix of professional satisfaction at a successful operation and personal weight at the human cost of warfare. 14 confirmed casualties, she replied without hesitation. All were armed individuals who had been engaged in acts of piracy. No civilians were harmed in the engagement. Lieutenant Chin's expression showed the internal conflict many young officers faced when confronting the realities of military service. Admiral, we're not questioning whether those individuals deserve to face consequences for their actions. Our concern is whether the level of force used was proportional to the threat they posed at the moment of engagement. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. A young petty officer entered and approached Admiral Thompson with obvious nervousness. Sir, the ceremony is scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. The press and dignitaries are asking about the delay. Admiral Thompson dismissed the petty officer and turned back to the group. We need to make a decision about how to proceed. We can postpone this discussion until after the ceremony, or we can address it now and potentially delay or cancel the event. Admiral Mitchell considered the options carefully. Postponing the discussion would allow the ceremony to proceed as planned, maintaining morale and avoiding immediate embarrassment to the Navy. However, it would also mean living with unresolved allegations hanging over what was supposed to be a celebration of successful operations. Before we decide anything, she said, I want to share something with all of you. Something that might help you understand the context of these operations more completely. She stood and moved to the window overlooking the harbor, gathering her thoughts. What she was about to reveal had been classified until recently, but the situation demanded complete transparency with her officers. The anti-piracy operations were not routine interdictions, she began. We had specific intelligence that the pirate groups in that region were being supplied with advanced weapons by international arms dealers. The vessels we engaged were not just threatening merchant shipping. They were part of a larger network that was destabilizing the entire region. Lieutenant Commander Davis looked up with surprise. We weren't briefed on that intelligence, Admiral. That's correct, Admiral Mitchell confirmed. The intelligence was compartmentalized to protect ongoing operations. But I can tell you that the weapons we recovered from those vessels included military-grade equipment that could have been used against military targets, not just civilian ships. This revelation changed the context significantly. What the junior officers had interpreted as excessive force against simple pirates was actually part of a larger operation against a well-armed and organized criminal network with international connections. Lieutenant Chin processed this information carefully. Admiral, why wasn't this context included in our operational briefings? Because the full scope of the operation was need to know, Admiral Thompson interjected. Admiral Mitchell was operating under direct orders from Naval Command to neutralize a significant threat to international shipping and regional stability. The room fell silent as the officers absorbed this new information. Admiral Mitchell could see them struggling to reconcile their observations with this broader context. It was a common challenge in military operations. Individual actions that seemed questionable in isolation often made perfect sense when viewed as part of a larger strategic picture. I understand your concerns, Admiral Mitchell continued, returning to her seat. In fact, I appreciate that you raised them. It shows that you're thinking critically about your actions and responsibilities as officers. However, I need you to understand that every decision made during those operations was based on intelligence and threat assessments that weren't available to everyone involved. Lieutenant Commander Davis looked around the table at his colleagues before speaking again. Admiral, we appreciate the additional context, but we still have concerns about the specific engagement protocols. Even with the broader threat assessment, we believe the continuation of engagement after the surrender signal requires review. Admiral Mitchell realized that the officers' concerns weren't going to be easily dismissed, nor should they be. Their professional instincts were sound, even if they lacked the complete picture of the operational situation. This was exactly the kind of situation that tested the military's commitment to ethical conduct and proper oversight. Here's what we're going to do, she decided. I'm going to request a formal review of all engagement protocols from those operations. The review will be conducted by an independent team from Naval Command, and all of you will have the opportunity to present your observations and concerns. Admiral Thompson nodded approvingly. That's the right approach. It protects everyone involved and ensures that proper procedures are followed. However, Admiral Mitchell continued, I also need your commitment that this discussion remains confidential until the review is completed. The media attention around these operations is already intense, and premature disclosure of internal concerns could damage ongoing operations and put other personnel at risk. The officers agreed to maintain confidentiality, understanding the broader implications of their concerns. Admiral Mitchell felt some of the tension in the room ease, but she knew that the day's events had fundamentally changed the trajectory of her career and the Navy's handling of the anti-piracy operations. Lieutenant Chun raised her hand slightly. Admiral, there's one more thing we need to discuss. During yesterday's debrief, there was a comment made about the casualty count that some of us found concerning. Admiral Mitchell's heart rate increased slightly. She had a sinking feeling about where this conversation was heading. What kind of comment? Admiral Thompson asked. Lieutenant Commander Davis looked uncomfortable, but pressed forward. During the informal discussion after the official debrief, there was a joke made about the effectiveness of the operations. Specifically, a comment about the kill count and how it compared to previous anti-piracy missions. The room fell completely silent. Admiral Mitchell remembered the moment clearly now. After the formal debriefing had ended, several officers had been discussing the success of the operations in more casual terms. In that context, someone had made a comment about the operational effectiveness that could be interpreted as making light of the casualties inflicted during the engagements. Who made this comment? Admiral Thompson asked, though his expression suggested he might already know the answer. Admiral Mitchell knew that denying or deflecting wouldn't serve anyone's interests. The officers had clearly heard something that troubled them deeply, and addressing it directly was the only way to maintain their trust and respect. I made a comment about the operational effectiveness, she admitted, in the context of discussing how well our tactical approach had worked compared to previous anti-piracy operations. If that comment was interpreted as making light of the casualties, then I owe you all an apology. The admission changed the atmosphere in the room once again. The junior officers had raised serious concerns about both the conduct of the operations and the leadership's attitude toward the results. Admiral Mitchell found herself facing not just questions about tactical decisions, but about her fundamental approach to command and the value of human life. Lieutenant Chin spoke carefully. Admiral, we understand that military operations involve casualties. Our concern was that the comment seemed to treat those casualties as a measure of success rather than as a necessary but regrettable consequence of protecting innocent lives. Admiral Mitchell realized that her casual comment had revealed something about her mindset that troubled her subordinates. In the pressure of command and the satisfaction of successful operations, she might have lost sight of the human cost that should always weigh heavily on any military leader's conscience. The ceremony outside was about to begin, but the real ceremony, the one that would determine Admiral Mitchell's future and the Navy's handling of these operations, was just beginning in this small conference room. The weight of Admiral Mitchell's admission settled over the conference room like a heavy anchor dropping into deep water. Outside, the sounds of the gathering ceremony could be heard, the military band warming up, the shuffle of dress shoes on concrete, and the low murmur of dignified conversation. Inside Conference Room B, 6 junior officers sat face-to-face with one of the Navy's most respected leaders, grappling with questions that would reshape their understanding of military command and moral responsibility. Admiral Thompson broke the silence that had followed Admiral Mitchell's acknowledgement. His voice carried the careful tone of someone navigating extremely sensitive waters. Sarah, I think we need to understand exactly what was said and in what context. These officers have raised legitimate concerns, and we need to address them completely. Admiral Mitchell nodded, recognizing that partial explanations would no longer suffice. The situation had moved beyond simple tactical reviews to fundamental questions about leadership, accountability, and the military's relationship with the human cost of warfare. After the formal debriefing on Tuesday, she began, several of us remained in the briefing room to discuss lessons learned from the operations. The conversation was informal, but it was still among senior officers discussing official business. Admiral Reynolds from Fleet Command had commented on how much more effective our approach had been compared to previous anti-piracy operations in the region. Lieutenant Commander Davis leaned forward slightly, his expression indicating that he remembered the moment clearly. We were present for part of that conversation, Admiral. We were gathering our materials when the discussion continued. That's right, Admiral Mitchell confirmed. Admiral Reynolds mentioned that previous operations had been less decisive, often resulting in pirates escaping to threaten other vessels. He asked about our casualty assessment, and I responded that our more aggressive engagement protocols had resulted in 14 confirmed eliminates compared to 0 in the previous 6 months of operations. The clinical language of military briefings, confirmed eliminates instead of deaths, highlighted one of the ways military culture managed the psychological impact of warfare. But Lieutenant Chin's expression showed that the euphemisms hadn't disguised the underlying reality that troubled her and her colleagues. Admiral, Lieutenant Chen said carefully, the specific comment that concerned us came after that exchange. You mentioned something about the numbers being impressive and joked about how the score compared to other operations. Admiral Mitchell felt the full weight of her casual words returning to haunt her. In the moment, surrounded by fellow officers discussing successful operations, the comment had seemed like harmless professional banter. Now, viewed through the lens of junior officers who had witnessed the actual engagement, her words took on a much different meaning. I said that our 14-0 score was significantly better than previous operations, she admitted. I referred to it as keeping score, which I now realize was inappropriate language for discussing casualties. Admiral Thompson's expression showed his understanding of how serious this revelation was becoming. Military leaders were expected to maintain proper perspective on the human cost of warfare, even when discussing successful operations. Treating casualty counts like sports statistics violated fundamental principles of military ethics and leadership. Lieutenant Commander Davis spoke with careful respect. Admiral, it's important for you to know that we're not questioning the tactical necessity of the engagements. Pirates who threaten civilian vessels forfeit certain protections, and our rules of engagement were clear. Our concern is about the attitude toward casualties and what it might suggest about future operations. The conversation was interrupted by another knock on the door. This time, Admiral Thompson's aide entered with obvious urgency. Sir, the ceremony needs to begin immediately. The Secretary of Defense's representative is asking specifically about Admiral Mitchell's participation. Admiral Thompson looked at Admiral Mitchell, who was clearly struggling with the decision. Attending the ceremony while these allegations hung in the air would be hypocritical, but canceling or postponing it would immediately raise questions that could damage the Navy's reputation and the morale of everyone who had participated in the successful operations. Give me 5 minutes, Admiral Thompson told his aide. Tell them Admiral Mitchell is handling an urgent operational matter. After the aide left, Admiral Thompson turned back to the group. We need to make a decision about how to handle this situation immediately. Sarah, these officers have raised serious concerns that can't be ignored, but we also have responsibilities to the Navy and to everyone who participated in those operations. Admiral Mitchell looked around the table at the 6 officers who had brought their concerns forward. She could see the conflict in their faces. They respected her service and leadership, but they couldn't ignore what they had observed and heard. Their willingness to raise difficult questions demonstrated exactly the kind of ethical thinking that the military needed to maintain its moral authority. I want to thank all of you for bringing these concerns forward, she said. It would have been easier to remain silent, but you chose to uphold your responsibilities as officers even when it was uncomfortable. That's exactly what the Navy expects and deserves from its personnel. Lieutenant Chen looked surprised by the Admiral's response. We were concerned about how this might affect your career, Admiral. We know that raising these issues could have serious consequences. The consequences of ignoring legitimate ethical concerns would be far worse, Admiral Mitchell replied. Not just for my career, but for the Navy's integrity and for the families of everyone involved in these operations. Admiral Thompson consulted his watch and realized that the decision could no longer be delayed. Sarah, we need to decide about the ceremony. We can proceed as planned, make a brief announcement about reviewing operational procedures, or postpone the entire event. Admiral Mitchell stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the assembled guests and personnel waiting for the ceremony to begin. She could see the press representatives, distinguished visitors, and hundreds of sailors who had worked hard to make the anti-piracy operation successful. The decision she made in the next few minutes would affect all of them. "Here's what we're going to do," she announced, turning back to face the group. "I'm going to attend the ceremony, but I'm going to use my remarks to address these concerns directly. The Navy's integrity is more important than any individual career or any single operation." Lieutenant Commander Davis looked concerned. "Admiral, are you certain that's the best approach? Once these concerns become public, there will be investigations, media scrutiny, and political pressure that could affect everyone involved." "That's exactly why we need to get ahead of this," Admiral Mitchell explained. "If we try to cover up legitimate concerns, we become part of the problem instead of part of the solution. The Navy's reputation will survive honest examination of our actions, but it won't survive attempts to hide ethical questions." Admiral Thompson nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in Admiral Mitchell's approach even though he understood the personal cost it would entail. "Sarah, if you're going to address this publicly, we need to coordinate with Naval Command immediately. They need to know what's coming." "Agreed," Admiral Mitchell said. "James," she addressed Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, "I need you to contact Admiral Harrison at Naval Command immediately. Tell him I need to speak with him before I make my remarks." As Rodriguez left to make the contact, Admiral Mitchell turned back to the 6 officers. "I want all of you to understand something. Your willingness to raise these concerns demonstrates exactly the kind of ethical thinking that makes our military strong. Don't let anyone tell you that you were wrong to bring these issues forward." Lieutenant Chen looked relieved but still concerned. "What happens to us now, Admiral? We've essentially accused a flag officer of inappropriate conduct. What happens to you is that you continue serving with honor and distinction," Admiral Mitchell replied firmly. "You've done your duty as officers, and anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me personally." The conversation was interrupted by Rodriguez's return. "Admiral, I have Admiral Harrison on a secure line. He wants to speak with you immediately." Admiral Mitchell excused herself and took the call in private. The conversation with Admiral Harrison was brief but intense. When she returned to the conference room, her expression showed that the situation had moved to an even higher level of command attention. "Naval Command is sending a team to conduct a comprehensive review of all anti-piracy operations," she announced. "The review will include examination of engagement protocols, casualty assessments, and leadership decisions. All of you will be interviewed as part of that process." Admiral Thompson understood the implications immediately. "Sarah, this means you'll be under formal investigation. Are you prepared for what that entails?" Admiral Mitchell had spent 30 years building a reputation for integrity and competent leadership. The investigation would examine every decision she had made during the operations, every order she had given, and every comment she had made. Her career, her reputation, and her legacy were now at stake. "I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from proper examination of my actions," she said. "The alternative is allowing ethical concerns to be ignored, which would damage the Navy far more than any individual investigation." As the group prepared to leave the conference room, Lieutenant Commander Davis spoke one final time. "Admiral, we want you to know that we respect your decision to address these concerns directly. It takes courage to choose transparency over self-protection." Admiral Mitchell appreciated the comment, but she knew that the real test of her courage was still ahead. In a few minutes, she would walk onto a stage in front of hundreds of people expecting to celebrate successful military operations, and instead she would acknowledge that those same operations raised serious ethical questions that demanded investigation. The walk from conference room B to the ceremony platform was the longest of Admiral Mitchell's career. Each step carried her further away from the comfortable certainty of military success and toward the uncertain territory of moral reckoning. Behind her, the 6 junior officers followed, knowing that their willingness to raise difficult questions had set in motion events that would reshape their understanding of military leadership and accountability. The ceremony that was supposed to celebrate the Navy's anti-piracy success was about to become something entirely different, a moment when the military's commitment to ethical conduct would be tested in the most public way possible. The ceremony platform stood under a brilliant blue sky, decorated with the flags of allied nations whose shipping the anti-piracy operations had protected. Hundreds of personnel in dress uniforms created neat rows of military precision, while distinguished guests and media representatives occupied special seating areas. The military band had finished their warm-up and stood ready to provide the traditional musical accompaniment for what everyone expected to be a celebration of naval excellence. Admiral Mitchell approached the platform with Admiral Thompson beside her, both aware that the next few minutes would fundamentally alter the trajectory of multiple careers and the Navy's public reputation. Behind them, the 6 junior officers who had raised the ethical concerns took their assigned positions, their faces showing the tension of knowing they had initiated events that would soon unfold before the entire assembly. Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, the ceremony coordinator, approached Admiral Mitchell with the final program details. His 28 years of service had taught him to read the subtle signs that indicated when something was wrong with his commanding officers, and Admiral Mitchell's expression set off every warning signal in his experienced mind. "Admiral, we're ready to begin," Williams reported. "The Secretary of Defense's representative is seated in the front row, and the media pool is prepared for your remarks." Admiral Mitchell nodded, accepting the weight of what she was about to do. In her prepared remarks, she had planned to celebrate the operational success, commend the bravery and skill of her personnel, and highlight the international cooperation that had made the missions possible. Instead, she was about to deliver a speech that would acknowledge serious ethical concerns about those same operations. The ceremony began with traditional military protocol. The posting of colors, the national anthem, and the invocation proceeded normally, providing a stark contrast to the extraordinary events that were about to unfold. As Admiral Mitchell stepped to the podium, the assembled crowd settled into respectful silence, expecting to hear about naval success and professional achievement. Distinguished guests, fellow officers, sailors, and members of the press, Admiral Mitchell began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "We gather today to discuss recent anti-piracy operations that have protected international shipping and saved civilian lives. However, I must begin with an acknowledgement that these operations have raised important questions that deserve our immediate and thorough attention." The change in the crowd's atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Conversation stopped, reporters leaned forward, and the assembled military personnel exchanged glances of confusion and concern. This was clearly not the celebration they had expected to attend. Excellence in military operations requires not only tactical success, but also unwavering commitment to ethical conduct and proper accountability, Admiral Mitchell continued. "Today I want to address concerns that have been raised by members of my command regarding specific aspects of our recent anti-piracy engagements." Admiral Thompson, standing to the side of the platform, watched the crowd's reaction carefully. He could see the Secretary of Defense's representative speaking quietly into his phone, while senior officers throughout the assembly began to realize they were witnessing an unprecedented moment in military leadership. 6 junior officers from the destroyer squadron that participated in these operations have raised legitimate questions about engagement protocols and casualty assessment procedures, Admiral Mitchell announced. "Rather than dismissing these concerns or handling them quietly behind closed doors, I believe the Navy's integrity requires that we address them openly and completely." Lieutenant Commander Davis, standing in formation with his colleagues, felt a mixture of pride and anxiety as he realized that Admiral Mitchell was keeping her promise to address their concerns publicly. The personal and professional courage required to acknowledge ethical questions about successful operations in such a public forum was extraordinary by any measure. Specifically, concerns have been raised about engagement protocols during the operation on September 15th, when pirate vessels had raised surrender signals, but continued to pose potential threats to our forces and civilian shipping, Admiral Mitchell continued. "These concerns deserve investigation by qualified personnel with access to all relevant intelligence and operational data." The media representatives were now taking notes frantically, understanding that they were witnessing a story that would dominate military and political news for weeks to come. The unusual sight of a flag officer publicly acknowledging internal criticism of successful operations was unprecedented in their experience covering military affairs. Additionally, I must acknowledge that I made inappropriate comments about casualty counts during informal discussions following operational debriefs, Admiral Mitchell admitted. These comments treated the human cost of warfare as a measure of success rather than as the serious consequence that casualties always represent, regardless of the circumstances that necessitate them. This admission sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Military personnel understood immediately that Admiral Mitchell was acknowledging a fundamental violation of the ethical standards expected of senior leaders. The willingness to make such an admission publicly demonstrated either extraordinary integrity or career-ending poor judgment, and many in the audience weren't certain which interpretation was correct. I have requested that Naval Command conduct a comprehensive review of all anti-piracy operations under my command, Admiral Mitchell announced. This review will examine engagement protocols, intelligence assessments, casualty reports, and leadership decisions. The reviewing authority will have access to all classified information relevant to these operations, and all personnel involved will have the opportunity to present their observations and concerns. Admiral Thompson knew that Admiral Mitchell had just ended her own career in the most honorable way possible. No flag officer could survive public acknowledgement of ethical concerns about their command decisions, especially when those acknowledgments were made voluntarily at a ceremony intended to celebrate their success. The courage required to choose institutional integrity over personal advancement was remarkable, but it came with a price that would reshape Admiral Mitchell's entire future. Lieutenant Shun, standing in formation and watching her commanding officer take responsibility for decisions that could have been defended or explained away, began to understand the true meaning of military leadership. Admiral Mitchell could have dismissed their concerns, transferred them to different commands, or simply weathered the investigation quietly. Instead, she had chosen transparency and accountability even when it meant professional destruction. The men and women who participated in these anti-piracy operations served with distinction and bravery, Admiral Mitchell continued. They followed orders, executed complex tactical plans under dangerous conditions, and saved civilian lives. Whatever questions arise from the subsequent review process should not diminish our recognition of their service and sacrifice. The ceremony crowd was now completely silent, absorbed in witnessing an extraordinary moment of military leadership. Many of the senior officers present had never seen a flag officer voluntarily subject themselves to this kind of scrutiny, and they were struggling to process the implications of what they were hearing. Military service requires us to make difficult decisions under extreme pressure, Admiral Mitchell said, approaching the conclusion of her remarks. We train extensively to ensure that those decisions are tactically sound, legally justified, and ethically appropriate. When questions arise about any of these aspects, our duty is to examine them honestly rather than defending them reflexively. Admiral Harrison from Naval Command had arrived during the ceremony and was standing at the back of the assembly, his expression showing the gravity of the situation he was now required to manage. The public nature of Admiral Mitchell's admissions had eliminated any possibility of handling the investigation quietly or allowing her to remain in command during the review process. I want to thank the junior officers who raised these concerns, Admiral Mitchell concluded. Their willingness to bring forward difficult questions demonstrates exactly the kind of ethical thinking that our military requires to maintain the trust of the American people and our international partners. They have upheld the highest traditions of naval service by placing institutional integrity above personal comfort. As Admiral Mitchell stepped back from the podium, the ceremony crowd remained in stunned silence for several long moments. The traditional closing ceremonies proceeded in a subdued atmosphere, with everyone present understanding that they had witnessed something unprecedented in military culture, a senior leader choosing institutional accountability over personal protection. After the ceremony concluded, Admiral Mitchell was immediately approached by Admiral Harrison, who escorted her away from the crowd for private discussion. The 6 junior officers who had raised the initial concerns found themselves surrounded by media representatives seeking comments, while senior officers throughout the assembly struggled to process the implications of what they had witnessed. Lieutenant Commander Davis, speaking to his colleagues as they left the ceremony area, summed up the feelings of many present. Whatever happens next, we've seen what real military leadership looks like. Admiral Mitchell chose the Navy's integrity over her own career. The investigation that followed Admiral Mitchell's public admissions was thorough and highly publicized. The review team examined every aspect of the anti-piracy operations, interviewed all personnel involved, and analyzed intelligence data that had previously been classified. The final report, released 6 months later, reached complex conclusions that reflected the difficult realities of modern military operations. The investigation found that Admiral Mitchell's tactical decisions during the anti-piracy operations were justified by the intelligence available at the time and the legitimate threat assessment of the situation. However, the report also concluded that her casual comments about casualty counts reflected an inappropriate attitude toward the human cost of warfare that was inconsistent with the standards expected of senior military leaders. Admiral Mitchell was quietly reassigned to a staff position and retired from active duty 18 months later with full honors. Her career ended not in disgrace, but with widespread respect for her willingness to prioritize institutional integrity over personal advancement. Many of her colleagues later acknowledged that her actions during the ceremony had strengthened the military's commitment to ethical accountability. The 6 junior officers who had raised the initial concerns all continued their naval careers with distinction. Their willingness to bring forward difficult questions became a case study in military ethics courses, and their experience demonstrated that the military's commitment to accountability extended to all levels of command. Admiral Thompson, reflecting on the events years later, often told younger officers that Admiral Mitchell's ceremony speech represented one of the finest examples of military leadership he had witnessed. The choice to address ethical concerns publicly rather than defending successful operations privately had required a form of courage that few leaders ever had the opportunity to demonstrate. The anti-piracy operations themselves became a model for international cooperation and tactical effectiveness, while the ethical questions they raised led to improved training and clearer guidance for future operations. The Navy's willingness to examine successful operations for ethical concerns, prompted by Admiral Mitchell's public admissions, ultimately strengthened the institution's moral authority and public trust. In the end, Admiral Mitchell's joke about casualty counts had indeed stopped the Navy in shock, but not because of the tactical success of the operations. Instead, it had shocked the institution into confronting difficult questions about the relationship between military effectiveness and ethical accountability. The ceremony that was meant to celebrate operational success had become a defining moment in the ongoing evolution of military leadership and moral responsibility.